According to a new scoop from Axios reporter Jonathan Swan, the Democratic Party's most influential women met with Vice President Kamala Harris in efforts to course correct the Veep's missteps so far in the Biden-Harris administration.
According to Swan, the women discussed how they could leverage Harris's experience as a prosecutor, California Attorney General, and senator in response to the pointed criticisms of her performance so far as vice president, particularly her answers to questions about the border crisis.
This comes after some reporting in July of an, quote, unhealthy environment inside Harris's office, as well as senior White House officials being frustrated with the vice president's performance. So, Kim, the thing that strikes me about this story is that why is this a surprise? I mean,
this shouldn't be.
Right. This was the issue that Harris had on the campaign trail. It's why she didn't make it very far in the presidential campaign. She had to drop out early because this was a repeat problem. So I don't understand how we didn't foresee this, or how the Democratic Party didn't foresee this being an issue.
I don't know how they didn't either. I mean, this was obviously, like you said, very clear during her campaign, and people don't change. You know, if she's got problems during the campaign, if the American people aren't taking to her, then why do you think the American people would suddenly, just because you made her vice president? So, look, she was an unlikable candidate. People liked her at first because she was taking down Joe Biden, and they liked that she called him out for a variety of different things, and saying that she believed the women and calling him a racist and all these things. And so that kind of trended well during the debates. But then after that, people realized that she flip-flopped. She wasn't really a leader. She doesn't really have any actual, ideas or policy or ideology. And she seems to just kind of do whatever her donors tell her to do. And so, look, that the American people sniffed that out and said, hey, we don't really like her. And so her approval ratings, or her, I don't know what you want to call it, during the primary, but they tanked. And so, but nonetheless, she was the pick. She was the one that had all of the resources from Hillary Clinton's campaign, a lot of the donors from Hillary Clinton, a lot of backing from the establishment. They made her a vice president, and now they're shocked. And they really, by the way, were not just thinking it would stop at vice president. And the reason why they're scrambling is because they ultimately wanted her to replace Joe. Whether he needs to be replaced early, or whether he needed to, not run for a second term. And this is just sort of crumbling, I think, their entire sort of vision of how this would go.
Yeah. Well, I think, it's interesting. The rumor always was, or the feeling always was, about Kamala Harris, both on the campaign trail and when she was a senator, that she is very good when she is scripted, when she knows, the question and she's got a scripted answer. But she's very bad and kind of falls apart when she has to respond on her feet. And I think this has been borne out, time and time again, especially on these questions she's getting about the border. She's the point person for the administration on the border, and she has a really hard time answering questions about it. You've seen this in multiple cases. And then you look, in the Axios coverage, one thing the White House will come out with again and again is anytime, there's a critical story about her, well, this is gendered coverage. This is because she's a woman. And, sure, I'm sure, media does cover women differently, but I think the point you made here is the right one to focus on, which is, guys, you picked her. Like, she's the person that you have, and she's going to be, a presence in 2024, whether she's on the ticket or if Joe Biden decides not to run again, she will be the head of that ticket because that's her role as vice president. So this is an issue that has to be solved, gender or no gender. And I'm not sure how they're going to do it because, again, as you point out, people don't change. And this has been a long and known history with Kamala Harris.
Yeah, people are not taking to her. So they've just got a problem. They either need to change her or they're just going to have to live with a bad candidate going forward. But that's really their only options at this point. They cannot rehabilitate her. You can't change her. She's going to giggle at inappropriate times. She's going to give answers that are vague. She's not a leader. It's just not what she's, maybe she's a great prosecutor, but she's not a leader. And it's very, very apparent.
The giggling at inappropriate times is maybe my favorite tick that she has, is just to laugh at all manner of questions. But I guess my question for you is, do you see how big of a deal would it be to replace her on the ticket? If Joe Biden decides to run again, how bad does it have to get? And would it sort of just tank the whole thing if they're like, yeah, we're going with the second string here? Can that even happen?
I think that's kind of where they're sort of needing to go with this. I don't think that Kamala can be the leader of the Democratic Party going forward. The only way that they're going to be able to optically get out of this is if she somehow has a crisis and she can no longer do it. So she says herself, I have decided for me and my family, for my husband, or whatever it is, but it's going to be difficult because she doesn't have children, right? So it's one thing if you say, my kids need me, I'm spending too much time away, this is like hard on my family, right? Like that's what Kellyanne Conway was able to sort of say. It's like, my kids need me now, I got to get out of here.
Well, in fairness, I think they did. Like they were having like mental
yeah.
breaks on TikTok, but yeah.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yes. Yeah. Her daughter was definitely, but so Kamala doesn't really have that sort of escape. It would have to be, I mean, then I don't know how you can get away with lying to people for too long, but I guess you could say something like having a health crisis that I need to deal with and focus on. But then it's like, well, what's the health crisis? And so it's going to be really difficult for them to figure out a way to manufacture a reason for Kamala Harris to decide on her own to step down. But that is going to be the only way out of this. And then they're going to have to probably replace her with someone who's also a woman of color, right? That's going to be their the way, and that's going to be a challenge when they're narrowing down their pool to such a small group.
The other thing that I think is interesting about this story is that so much of this is also a product of the White House's own making. You know, first in her selection, knowing that she has this obvious baggage, but second, they have really pushed her out front. You know, they've given her some very high-profile responsibilities. They've made her the point person for the border. I think she's the point person on several other task forces that are actually major White House priorities and White House issues and things that the press is going to ask about. Like, Republicans aren't going to give you a pass on the border. Like, that's just not who they are. And so you put someone in charge knowing that, they may not have or be the best person to respond to it. So I'm kind of like wondering what the White House is doing here.
Yeah, I mean, so there's, two kind of ways you could maybe interpret that. So one way is that they were trying to get her to sort of look more presidential. She was doing a lot of stuff with foreign policy and the border. And so that's kind of the stuff that a president is really going to be pressed on when they're running for office. And so maybe it was them trying to see, okay, can she look presidential? Can people in their minds imagine her as president of the United States? The other way to look at this is maybe they already knew. Maybe by that point, they kind of got a sense that Kamala is not going to work and that we're eventually just going to have to replace her. So let's make her the fall guy, right? Like the border crisis is difficult. It's impossible. It's gonna bring Joe Biden's ratings down. So maybe we should just throw Kamala in there, let her be the fall guy for it. And then when Joe Biden runs again in 2024, he can kind of point to his inept vice president. I mean, that's maybe.
Hey, I've seen a lot of cynicism in a lot of White Houses. You can't rule it out. But I guess we'll just keep watching it all unfold. So thank you guys. More Rising coming up next.